You have outgrown your family. And if you clicked on this video, you already know what that feels like. You sit at the dinner table, surrounded by the same people who raised you, and you feel completely alone. Not because you don't love them, but because something inside you has shifted so deeply that you can barely find the words to explain it. According to Carl Jung, this isn't a betrayal. It isn't ingratitude. It is one of the most profound psychological awakenings a human being can experience, and what is happening to you right now has a name. But here is what makes this so painful. The moment you start to grow, the people closest to you often push back the hardest, and that reaction, that resistance from the very people who are supposed to love you unconditionally, is not random. Jung spent decades studying this exact pattern. What he found explains not only why your family is reacting the way they are, but why you feel like the villain in a story you didn't choose to be part of. Think about the guilt you carry, that quiet, heavy weight that follows you everywhere. You wonder if you are being selfish. You wonder if something is wrong with you. You start questioning whether your need to grow and change is somehow hurting the people you love. And that guilt is real. It is not imagined. But according to Jung, it is also not yours to carry, because what you are experiencing is not a personal failure. It is individuation, and it terrifies the people around you for reasons that have nothing to do with you personally. Let's start here. Jung observed that families do not function like collections of separate individuals. They function more like a single organism. Every member of a family plays a role. The peacemaker, the responsible one, the funny one, the one who never asks for too much. These roles are not chosen consciously. They are assigned quietly and invisibly from the time you're a child, and the entire family system depends on everyone staying exactly where they were placed. Jung called this shared psychological space the collective unconscious. Within a family, this takes the form of something he described as participation mystique, a kind of invisible psychological glue that binds family members together through shared beliefs, shared fears, and shared patterns of behavior. Nobody in the family agrees to this consciously. Nobody sits down and decides how everyone will think and feel and react. It simply happens. And for years, you participated in it without even realizing it. The participation mystique is not something that requires dysfunction to exist. It lives just as comfortably in warm, loving families as it does in broken ones. In fact, the more loving the family, the harder it is to recognize. Because when you love people, you naturally want to protect them. You naturally take on their emotional weight. You naturally suppress the parts of yourself that might cause them worry or discomfort. And that instinct, which comes entirely from love, slowly builds walls around your own development without you ever noticing they were being built. But then, something changed inside you. Maybe it was a book you read. Maybe it was therapy or travel or a friendship that showed you a different way of existing in the world. Maybe it was simply a quiet moment where you looked at your life and realized it did not feel like yours. Whatever the trigger was, you began to individuate. You began to develop a self that was separate from the role your family assigned to you. And that is when the trouble started. Because here is what nobody tells you about growing. When one person in a family system starts to change, the entire system feels threatened. Not because your family is evil, not because they are consciously trying to hold you back, but because your growth forces a mirror in front of them, and most people, when they see their own reflection clearly for the first time, do not say thank you. Jung documented this pattern across his clinical work. Picture a person who spent the first 30 years of their life being the reliable anchor of their family. Always available, always accommodating, never asking for more than they were given. Then one day, this person began therapy. They began reading. They began questioning. And within months, Their family had a new name for them: difficult, selfish, changed for the worse. What had actually changed? This person had started to individuate. They had started asking for their own needs to be met. They had started saying no to things that drained them. And from the outside, from the perspective of a family that had grown dependent on their compliance, this looked like abandonment. This is what Jung called the disruption of shadow dynamics. The shadow, in Jungian psychology, is everything that a person or a family refuses to look at in themselves. The anger that gets masked as worry. The control that gets dressed up as love. The fear of change that masquerades as concern for your well-being. Every family has a shadow. And as long as everyone plays their assigned role, that shadow stays hidden. Nobody has to look at it. Nobody has to deal with it. But when you start to individuate, you stop feeding the shadow. You stop enabling the patterns that kept it hidden. And suddenly, everything the family refused to see starts rising to the surface. The dysfunction becomes visible. The unhealthy dynamics become impossible to ignore. And because families, like all systems, prefer to stay the same rather than grow, the easiest solution is to blame the person who disrupted the system. That person is you. Jung identified this as the scapegoat phenomenon. The individual who grows, who changes, who begins to live with more consciousness and self-awareness often becomes the repository for the family's unacknowledged pain. You are not blamed because you did something wrong. You are blamed because your presence makes it harder for everyone else to avoid what they have been avoiding for years. And the scapegoating is rarely obvious. Empaths aren't broken. They're alchemists in progress. The Alchemist's Path gives you drills, Jung-based boundaries, and 3 exclusive chapter videos to turn overwhelm into clarity. By Surreal Mind, 236-page downloadable ebook in stock. Begin now at thesurrealmind.com. It doesn't always look like yelling or direct confrontation. More often, it looks like subtle comments, passive questions about whether you think you're better than everyone else now, eye rolls when you talk about something you've learned, a sudden coldness from a sibling who used to be close, an atmosphere at family gatherings that makes you feel like you have committed some unspoken crime. These are not accidents. They are the system defending itself. You may also notice that the rules seem to change depending on your behavior. When you are compliant and small, you are welcomed. You are loved loudly. You are included. But the moment you assert a boundary, the moment you decline to participate in a pattern that no longer serves you, the warmth drops. The room gets colder. People find reasons to be busy. You are made to feel, without a single direct statement, that love here is conditional on your compliance. That is not love. That is management. And one of the most important steps in your individuation is learning to tell the difference between the two. What makes this even harder is that your family, in most cases, genuinely believes they are the ones being wronged. Jung was clear about this. The families he observed were not deliberately cruel. They were unconsciously desperate. When their family member began to grow, they experienced it as a loss, a betrayal, even an attack. Because in the language of the unconscious, change in one person is a demand for change in everyone. And that demand is terrifying. Now here is where it gets even more complicated. Because you love these people. You are not indifferent to their pain. You are an empathetic person, which is precisely why you clicked on a video with this title. You feel the guilt they project toward you. You absorb their disappointment. You find yourself shrinking again, trying to go back to who you used to be, just to ease the tension, just to make the family feel comfortable again. And for a while it works. The tension drops. Things go back to normal. But normal in this case means you go back to sleep. You go back to living. A life that belongs to the family system rather than to yourself. And every time you do this, something inside you gets a little smaller. Jung was direct about this. he said that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are, not who your family needs you to be, not who your culture assigned to you, but who you actually are, underneath all the conditioning. And the path to that self requires passing through exactly the kind of discomfort you are feeling right now. Here is something worth sitting with. Jung noticed that the people who struggle most with this process are not the selfish ones. They are the most empathetic ones, the ones who feel other people's pain so deeply that they will set themselves on fire to keep others warm. If you are watching this and feeling guilty for your own growth, that guilt is actually proof of how much you care. But caring deeply and erasing yourself are two very different things, and at some point, you have to decide which one you can actually live with long term. Let's talk about what happens at the peak of this experience, because this is the part that breaks people. There comes a moment, sometimes sudden and sometimes slow, where you are forced to make a choice. Not consciously, not in a single dramatic conversation, but somewhere inside you, at the level where all real decisions actually get made, you arrive at a crossroads. On one side is your own sanity, your own growth, your own individuation, the version of your life where you honor what you have discovered about yourself and continue moving toward it. On the other side is the family's comfort, the peace that comes from staying small, the temporary relief of not being the one who disrupted everything. Jung called this the individuation crisis, and it is a real crisis because both options have consequences. If you choose yourself, you face the pain of being misunderstood, possibly for a very long time. If you choose the family system, you face the quiet death of your authentic self. There is no version of this that doesn't hurt. Jung never promised it would be painless. What he promised was that only one of those choices leads to actual life. And here is the part that no one prepares you for. The crisis rarely announces itself with dramatic clarity. You do not wake up one morning and hear a clear voice telling you it is time to choose. Instead, it arrives as a slow accumulation of feelings you cannot name. A heaviness before family visits, a tightening in your chest when you answer your phone and see a familiar name, a habit of rehearsing conversations before they happen. These are not signs of weakness. They are signs that your psyche is doing everything it can to protect the self you are becoming, while still trying to honor the connections that matter to you. Both of those things are worth honoring. The tension between them is not a problem to be solved. It is a passage to be moved through. Imagine a woman in her mid-30s who realized she had spent her entire adult life managing her mother's emotional instability. Every decision she made, from who she dated to where she lived to what career she pursued, was quietly filtered through the question of how her mother would react. When she began her own inner work, she started making choices based on what she actually wanted. Her mother called it cruelty. Her siblings called it a phase. She sat in that pain for months, questioning whether she was the problem. She was not the problem. She was the solution, but the family system wasn't ready to accept the solution yet. That story is not unusual. It is, in fact, remarkably common. And the key insight from Jung is this: the intensity of a family's reaction to your growth is often a direct measurement of how much the family needed you to stay stuck. The harder they pushed back, the more dependent the system was on your compliance. Jung also observed something that takes most people by complete surprise. He noticed that when someone begins to individuate, they often go through a period where their personality seems to flip. People who were once quiet become outspoken. People who were once endlessly agreeable suddenly have opinions that make others uncomfortable. People who once swallowed every insult start calmly naming what happened. From the outside, this looks like arrogance. It looks like attitude. It looks like they have become someone unpleasant. But Jung understood that this is not arrogance appearing for the first time. It is the authentic self emerging, often louder than expected, because it has been suppressed for so long. When something has been held underwater for years, it does not rise slowly. It bursts to the surface. And the people around you, who were comfortable with the quiet, compliant version of you, will experience this burst as an attack. It is not an attack. It is a person coming up for air. But here is where the real work begins. Because Jung did not believe that outgrowing your family meant abandoning them. He was not advocating for cold disconnection or dramatic exits. What he described as the goal of successful individuation is something far more nuanced than that. He called it psychological sovereignty. Psychological sovereignty does not mean you stop loving your family. It does not mean you cut contact with everyone who ever hurt you. What it means is that you establish yourself as the primary author of your own life. You stop outsourcing your sense of self to the reactions of others. You develop the internal structure to remain yourself, clearly and calmly, even when the people around you are doing everything in their power to pull you back into the old version of you. This requires something that most people have never been taught. It requires the ability to hold love and limits at the same time. To care about someone while also being honest that you cannot sacrifice your development for their comfort. To show up for family with warmth while also refusing to disappear into a role that no longer fits. Jung believed this is not only possible, it is necessary, not just for your sake, but for the sake of everyone around you. Because when you achieve genuine psychological sovereignty, something unexpected happens. You stop being reactive. You stop being threatened by the family's emotional pressure. You can sit in the same room as the dysfunction without being swallowed by it. And that calm, grounded presence, that ability to remain yourself without needing anyone's approval, is the most powerful thing you can offer to the people you love. It doesn't mean they will immediately appreciate it. Some families take years to adjust. Some members may never fully adjust. But the ones who are capable of growth, the ones who have the capacity for it, even if they haven't found it yet, will eventually be moved by the steadiness you model. Not by your arguments, not by your explanations, by the simple, quiet fact of you being fully yourself without apology. There is a practical side to this worth naming. Psychological sovereignty is not just a state of mind. It shows up in specific moments. It shows up when your parent says something that used to collapse you, and you feel the old wound, but you do not react from it. It shows up when you choose not to explain yourself to people who have already decided what they think. It shows up when you leave a family event early because staying would cost you something real, and you do it without guilt, spiraling afterward. These small moments, these quiet choices to stay in yourself rather than dissolving into what others expect, are where real individuation happens. Not in grand declarations, in ordinary decisions made with unusual honesty. Now, I want to be honest with you about something, because I think you deserve honesty more than you deserve comfort. This process is long. It is not something that gets resolved in a single conversation or a single breakthrough moment. Establishing psychological sovereignty within a family that is used to you being compliant takes sustained effort. There will be weeks where you feel confident and clear, and there will be weeks where you feel so guilty, so confused, so worn down by the family's resistance that you wonder if it was all a mistake. It wasn't. That doubt is part of the process. Jung understood that individuation is not a straight line. It loops and spirals. You will sometimes regress. You will sometimes act from the old patterns even after you have outgrown them. That is not failure. That is being human. What matters is that you keep returning to yourself. Keep returning to the truth of who you are becoming. Keep honoring the growth even when the people around you insist on calling it something ugly. Jung also observed that as individuals achieve their own psychological sovereignty, they often begin to naturally attract relationships that can actually hold who they are, becoming. Friends, partners, mentors, communities that meet them at their real level rather than at the level they used to perform at. This is not abandonment of the family. This is the natural expansion of a life that is being lived fully. And it is one of the most beautiful side effects of doing the real psychological work. Here is what I personally believe. The people who outgrow their families are almost never the cold ones. They are the ones who cared the most, for the longest time, at the greatest personal cost. They gave more than they were given. They stayed longer than was healthy. And the fact that they are still asking questions and still trying to understand is proof they have not lost their heart. They have simply decided, for perhaps the first time, to include themselves in the people they care for. There is something I think you need to hear right now. You are not the problem in your family. You are not selfish for growing. You are not cruel for choosing yourself. You are not destroying your family by refusing to stay small. What you are doing is living the life that is actually yours to live. And that, according to Jung, is the most courageous and necessary thing a human being can do. The guilt you feel is understandable. It makes sense that you feel it, given how long you were taught that your value was tied to your usefulness to others. But guilt is not the same as truth. And the fact that your growth makes others uncomfortable does not make your growth wrong, it makes it real. Carl Jung spent his entire career studying what happens to people who fail to individuate, who stay in the roles assigned to them, who suppress their authentic selves to maintain family peace. What he found was not comfort. What he found was depression, neurosis, a pervasive sense of meaninglessness, and a life that looked fine from the outside, but felt hollow from within. That is the cost of not outgrowing what no longer fits. You are not wrong for feeling what you feel. You are not wrong for wanting more than the role you were handed. You are not wrong for sensing that your life is supposed to look different from what your family has imagined for you. That feeling is not rebellion. It is your psyche calling you toward wholeness. So here is where we land. You have outgrown your family, or at least you have outgrown the version of yourself that the family needed you to be. And that is not the end of the relationship. It is, in many ways, the beginning of the only honest version of it. The version where you show up as who you actually are, rather than as the character you were cast to play. The most important thing to understand, the thing Jung returned to again and again throughout his work, is that your development does not make you a bad person. It makes you a growing one. And a growing person is not a threat to a healthy family. A growing person is only a threat to a system that was never healthy to begin with. That distinction matters more than you might realize right now. Jung's path is not easy. Psychological sovereignty is not handed to you. It is built, slowly and sometimes painfully, through the exact kind of experience you are living right now. But on the other side of this, there is something real and worth every difficult step. A life that is genuinely yours, relationships that are genuinely mutual, a sense of self that does not collapse every time someone expresses disappointment in you. That is what is available to you if you keep going. Not someday, not eventually. Right now, in every single choice you make to remain yourself, you are actively and consciously building it, one honest moment at a time. In The Alchemist's Path, perception training for empaths, you'll turn overwhelm into wisdom with practical drills, Jung-inspired boundaries, and step-by-step perception training. This guide includes 3 exclusive chapter videos to deepen each lesson. Written by Surreal Mind, 236 pages, beautifully designed 8.5 by 11 downloadable ebook, in stock now. Start your training today. Feel deeply while thinking clearly. Get The Alchemist's Path at thesurrealmind.com.